Okay, so let's talk about the dance on set. The categories here, we live in interesting times. Some of the questions you have to ask yourself, how many people here are doing HDR monitoring on set already? Whoa. That puts me in a really unique position in this room. Okay. How many people here have finished jobs in HDR? Oh my gosh, really? Okay, well that's interesting. Well, relatively important to streaming, almost all of the original streaming content that's being created is being also mastered in HDR. This usually means one or two different things, either Dolby Vision and HDR10, or one or the other, depending on the standard. A company like Netflix prefers the Dolby Vision standard, but they also do make HDR10 masters based off that.
So meaning the Rec 2020 as opposed to the...
Rec 2020, yeah. That's fascinating. Not a single person in the room has done an HDR workflow.
All the distributor stuff and that is all you can do 709. So. And you need the special monitor, don't you, for the 2020? So.
You do need the special monitors.
And the Flanders ones are 35 grand.
You don't need a Flanders, but you can do it on Shoguns and all sorts of stuff. You have to calibrate things, and you'll have various success levels. Flanders are obviously very good quality.
We've got that for the 1080, but it doesn't go in the 4K. So.
Yeah. The biggest problem.
Although Netflix wants HDR deliverables, how much of that is actually deliverable to the audience? That's
more than you'd think. Almost all of the new 4K televisions that have been selling, I think, to the tune of 80 to 100 million units this year.
Yeah, but the pipeline to them doesn't really deliver HDR.
No, they're supported through the apps and through Apple TV, for instance, supports Dolby Vision and HDR10. Just depends. If you're talking about broadcast signal, like a cable going in, no, not at the moment.
Or even Netflix goes.
Netflix, depending on the television and the app, should support Dolby Vision.
Most of those go through.
On the LGs, it does. On a per television basis. So this is some of the problems of the industry right now. Like there's so much going on with HDR and even resolution. Like everyone's trying to scratch their heads. I was just talking to Travis from Atomos here, and one of the projects I did for Apple is the largest to date and one of the first multi-country Dolby Vision releases. And we learned a lot in that process because we suddenly blasted out an HDR signal to 135 countries suddenly, like literally like one day it didn't exist and then that was there. And that was a huge learning process because the subsequent things that we had to kind of adapt to the following year on a production, we learned a lot from that process.
I just had a delivery list for Lionsgate and that had Rec 2020 and 709. You had to give both versions.
Yeah.
Because obviously the colours changed, don't they?
Yeah, that's the thing. So maybe I'll dabble with this on the post workflow a little bit. But yes, now people are looking for deliverables in various forms, SDR, HDR, both, one or the other. A lot of people now have realized instead of just spending lots of money and mastering for SDR and HDR separately, maybe make an HDR master and then derive your SDR from it, or concurrently do both grades at the same time. Some color workflows are better than others than that. Deeper subject. HDR workshop coming soon. Real deep subject. Like even P3 versus DCI, it's really complicated. Okay, but what's going on set right now is really interesting. For several years, because I tend to do this higher resolution work, people have been looking for higher resolution and higher quality monitors on set. I think the easy one that people are asking for right now is 4K monitoring on set, and not many cameras do it, but some of the newest ones do. I would think almost every camera being used on productions that's going to be released from next year on will have 4K monitoring out. So that's something to be aware of. Does that necessarily mean that you need to have suddenly a bunch of 4K production monitors on set? No, in fact, I'm actually going to be fully keeping HD production monitors for like makeup to monitor things. But for client monitors, yes, I am going to be using 4K monitors on set because they want to not only see the 4K content, and now I'm being asked, can we see the HDR? Some productions now on set are even doing live grading on set. So that means a signal's coming from a camera and it's being manipulated in real time.
You're gonna have a LUT in there.
You could be making a LUT to then apply. I mean, there's a lot of different workflows. I don't typically do this, but when I started getting asked to do it, or at least figuring out ways to do it, it was like, oh, why are we doing this? Oh, this is why. Suddenly now, in some workflows, people really desire to see what the final image is on set. Sometimes now on set, you are basically making a deliverable on the day. So you're having a baked in LUT on some sort of footage that's either coming out of the camera or coming from your DIT. This is sort of the workflow conversation, and this is where I'm really highlighting there is no one workflow, because every job's gonna put you in a weird different situation. My general mode of operation is no matter the camera I'm working with, I'm filming in the highest quality RAW format it can. So on some cameras that don't have a RAW format, I go to log, like whatever their log format. If you're on a Sony, it's an S-Log. If you're on a Panasonic, what do they call them, the new log? V-Log? I almost said Verilog. Verilog. That's a very long log. So yeah, you just want to shoot in a profile or a format that's going to give you a very high quality, very easy to grade image. If you're just baking out a Rec 709 master and you have to do some color work, you're already working from a place of a lossy start.
Doing everything in RAW. It's coming off the reds in RAW.
Yeah, red code raw.
Then I'm keeping it in RAW all the time. Like.
I'll talk about that. I do that. Not everyone needs to do that.
For something coming up, I think I'm going to have to do offline versions, all right? So,
Yeah, proxy workflow and stuff. Next section, I'll dabble with that a little bit, because we're not editing on set. Some people do, but I don't want to talk about it because they're lunatics. So really what this, from top to bottom, you just have to kind of know what you're basically sending out of the camera, what everyone's seeing, what everyone needs to see. So if you suddenly are working on a perfume commercial that is very high budget and they want 4K HDR monitoring, you need to find ways to supply that. And that's what I'm saying. It just depends. It sounds like I'm very much alone in the world right now in this room when it comes to HDR workflows, but almost everything for 3 years I've done has been mastered in HDR. So it's a very interesting position for me to be in, talking to a room of people who have very little experience doing it, which is cool because it's still a new technology. And a lot of it really kind of got settled on this year. And honestly, it's still kind of hard in terms of even the hardware that's required to make a good HDR grade. And in the case of Dolby Vision, the licenses necessary to produce a Dolby Vision grade. But this might be the journey for you through a post house. You know, then there'll be a Dolby Vision license vendor and whatever. Yeah. Some of the other stuff I want to talk about. So in the first section of planning, we're talking about that data rate and things like that. I work primarily on RED cameras, and a lot of these cameras actually have adopted the same sort of multi-resolution and multi-format sort of, and by format I don't mean codec, I mean format like format size. This is a large format digital cinema camera with the VistaVision sensor. But on this camera, if you shoot 5K to 6K, you're about Super 35. So you have to kind of be aware of the formats that you're recording in on these cameras and what you're pushing out, as well as the resolution to influence your data rate and things like that. So, I mean, my hard truth is honestly, since, 2012, I haven't shot much under 5K. In the last 3 years, very little under 8K, like one job. So very much kind of doing stuff. And I'm using that resolution to do lots of stuff. And this is kind of what I'm kind of highlighting here. You can downsample that 8K resolution or 6K resolution, whatever camera you're using, and that will give you a better quality image. It will minimize noise for people who don't like noise or texture or grain or whatever you want to call it, gremlins. You can also use it to do interesting things like extraction. A very common workflow, especially on productions that use RED cameras, is they'll work with 8K resolution and extract like the 6K, which gives them some leverage on the rest of the frame because you can stabilize, reframe, you can do all sorts of wacky stuff. So depending on what type of filmmaker you are, what your needs are, you're gonna start designing your workflows around this. This is a little bit of planning, but this is also what you're doing on your day-to-day basis on set. So it's very important to, as a DP mainly, to be really on top of this because, if you're suddenly dealing with a job that you have 6 or 7 cameras on set, you might be juggling a lot of different things and figuring out why you do certain things. Like it's not uncommon to have a large, especially nowadays, to have a large format camera and maybe like a Super 35 camera. In fact, even in the film world right now, that's actually common because you got people doing like anamorphic Super 35 for dialogue and then large format for establishing shots because those take less takes usually and it's cheaper. So it's very interesting. It's kind of crazy because as a filmmaker, I'm usually like a stickler for having one format on screen. That's just my personal thing. I don't know. Like I'm not, like I like the Chris Nolan films where suddenly it's like, you have this and then suddenly the image is taller and you're like, and then you go back to the, and you're like, okay. It worked for like Grand Budapest to have different aspect ratios, but I always try to have certain visual language consistencies. Everyone can be different though. Go nuts to your heart's desire. Okay. So scheduling, complicated topic. I sort of hinted at some of the E&G workflows. Some of the interesting workflows I've been helping design specifically for news agencies and esports are real interesting. We're now in an era where mobile phones are used as transmission devices. So you've seen news trucks around town, right? The crazy ones that look like they have UFOs stapled to the top of them or whatever. So that news truck is still necessary in a lot of worlds, but nowadays they're putting reporters in the field in a Prius with a tripod and sometimes just a cell phone. To make content. And you'll see a reporter put the cell phone with a little shotgun mic and a wireless lav going into some weird Sonic or whoever XLR adapter, and it's like, I'm Aubrey and the forest is on fire, back to you, Ted. And like that's what's going on, and then she sends the file in and that's what's on the news in 10 minutes. It's crazy what you can do now. So when I talk about on-set workflow, that's on location workflow, really, when it comes down to it. And that workflow is you're producing a deliverable that's going to somebody to be put on air. In fact, that's what a lot of the E&G world is. The esports world is interesting because it's also relating to recorded material as well as live broadcast. I don't know if I'm going to be focusing too much on live broadcast for this workshop, but there's just a lot of things happening now. I did a series of commercials for Absolute Vodka. And this is one of the few projects where I wasn't doing it directly for the company. An agency actually hired me to do the job. For 2 of the shoots, we had no agency on set, but yet they were there. We were live streaming the shoot to them. We had little cameras set up so they could see what was going on. And I was suddenly getting directorial notes via walkie-talkie from a head that was in New York. And we were shooting in Santa Monica. And you're like, okay. And like literally at least twice, I actually moved the post like, look, you're now, it would be almost like moving a human being if you think about it. Like it felt so awkward, but it's what they wanted to do. It's easy to have 15 agency people sitting in an office in New York versus putting them up on the other side of the country for like a week-long shoot, even though they'd love to travel to California many times while we're shooting. Oh, California, what's the weather like in California? I know it's cold in New York right now, I get it. We're making vodka commercials here, come on. It was actually really funny on one of those, we had a gaffer cut himself very badly. I'm usually very safe on sets, but he did something very stupid to knock off a knuckle. So they, in a live stream fashion, saw someone bleeding a lot and be taken away by an ambulance. And then the VFX supervisor and I proceeded to gaff the rest of the shoot. It was actually hilarious. Yeah. Anyways, weird random story. So the fast workflow, that's quick turnaround stuff that's very actually common these days with web-based commercials. I know people who are sometimes shooting content and delivering it at the end of the day or the end of the week. It really depends on the style of the workflow. If we're talking about more episodic in nature, we kind of touched on that a little bit, but with the streaming services, because now we're seeing 2 different flavors of how episodics are being delivered, either all at once or in a weekly sort of scenario. that's something you have to be aware of, what targets you actually have to hit. If you have a hard deadline every week, that really does affect what you're doing from a planning stage and an execution stage. If you hired me tomorrow to do an episodic show, let's say a 22 episode show, no matter the shooting schedule, I would try to get 6 to 8 in the can before air. So that would be my schedule to shoot before the things are even actually live. And that's pretty common when it comes to shows for like NBC or whatever. One of the interesting ones I've been kind of studying a lot because I know some people working on it is Survivor. Survivor is a reality TV show with a lot of cameras and a lot of assets, and also Deadliest Catch is a good example. They will start shooting it very early on and maybe just working on the last few episodes, or actually do the entire season before they even work on the edit. Because there's just so much data, so many assets. On Survivor, they got crazy amounts of cameras. Like, I heard like one season they were dealing with like 37 cameras. And you're like, okay. So you have like shoulder cam guys and girls all attached to various people on the show, plus people doing remotes, plus people doing inserts and then interview stuff. Like it is, and plus all the node cameras that they have, like little night vision stuff. Like, so much to take into account. But that's where you're starting to look at the data, the importance of data and like understanding what you're doing, because suddenly every day you have to have the support system, the ecosystem, the storage ecosystem for each one of those cameras. So very interesting thing. And then the film workflow, which is kind of more or less how most of my projects actually work, even the commercial ones, where we shoot the thing and we finish the thing and then it goes to air. And that is a really nice way to work, because if you do have a rainy week and you had to shoot a beach scene, you can delay things by a week. If you're working on a television show and you're adding a beach scene and it rains for a week, find another beach like quickly, because you're starting to get behind the gun, right? I want to touch on organization. So I call this the holy mag. This is an interesting concept. I have a lot of different things to say about on-set workflow regarding recording media. The safest place your footage ever is on the mag. That's it. Everything you do after that, you have to take care of what you're doing. You have to be doing MD5 checks. You have to be making sure that the data is secure, because once you've offloaded the mag, now you're putting it onto drives. So might touch this a little bit more in the DIT section and data management section next, but I'll go into it here because we're kind of open-ended here. I've worked on so many different types of productions, and every time I've been faced with a new DIT, it's been something interesting. When data rates were a struggle for people on set, I would have a DIT come to me, a new DIT I've never worked with before. Hey, can you give us a mag at 20, 30% full or half full all day long so we don't have to download these full mags? And I'm like, well, it's the beginning of the day. Certainly if we fill up a mag, like you'll have time after, like what? Like, what do you ask me? So it's very interesting because I'm not really put into the position too much where I have conflicts with people. So on my productions, I decided to solve all of my own problems with how I deploy things. And I'm not saying this is the best way to work, but when you're starting to give mags to a DIT who has to then offload and then do all the backups, and then sometimes mags are cycled back to you that you recorded on even earlier that day, lots of chaos can happen. Did your person switch hands with the two mags and go, here's the one that we just shot on. What? What? Your digital loader just ruined the first half of the day of shooting, right? So my personal solution to this on all of my productions is, as I've geared up for productions, and actually it's been done now on a lot of feature films, a lot of the Transformers films in particular, I buy enough media to shoot for a day, safely. In fact, on a couple jobs, I buy enough media to cover me for a week. Because there's never going to be a moment where I'm going to have a mag accidentally erased ever. I've never had that happen. It's just not gonna happen. So it's not even a knock on wood thing. This is like a religion for me. So if I'm dealing with the data management system on set, everything's color coded. There's no error. Tape gets put on the mag when it leaves the camera. So I know, and the tape lives on the camera, or is that tape, like that's a recorded mag. Like there is no room for error because, you know, I've worked on stuff where we're blowing stuff up and there's only one of them. And there is no other take. So, like, there is no, we rebuild the building that we got permits to blow up? Like, no. So you just have to do everything and protect that. So that said, that doesn't necessarily need to be the workflow for everybody. But the process from there is what happens with the data. So at the point of download, I always recommend offloading to 2 different drives for double data redundancy. I actually always have 3 copies typically on set. We have the workable copy in case we have to make dailies or anything like that, and then our backup copies. Everything gets data verified via MD5. I made a cool little program where like you can literally drop a mag and it does it all for you and gives you any sort of reports if there's any sort of errors. And it's been a godsend because it like makes things so easy for me. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is the most prized possession that you have once you film the footage is the mag itself. So you have to trust your DIT, your data manager, your digital loader, whoever you want to call, Scotty from catering that you tossed $50 to like truck the mag, whatever's going to happen. Like that is the most sensitive thing that you've done because once you destroy it, it's gone forever. I was talking to Mark. You have a question?
Actually, well, quick question for the room. Is everybody in here familiar with what a checksum is? Yeah. Raise your hand if you are. Okay, good. For those, okay, there's...
MD5 checksum, yeah. What?
Yeah, so I see about half the room isn't. A checksum is a verification of the data.
Yeah.
So when you're making a copy, if you drag and drop with the finder, there's no guarantee, there's no guarantee that there are no changes between the original file and the copy. So what a checksum does is it verifies, once the copy is complete, it actually goes back and compares the copied file to the original.
Bit per bit.
Bit for bit and make sure that that they match.
Yeah.
So that you know that you essentially have your original thing.
In the programming world, it's known as a diff, but the standardization of it is checksum and MD5 and the other ways of verifying the data. Basically, you're sniffing the original source data and your copy. And if there is anything wrong, it's usually alluding to probably a connection issue or drive health, interesting stuff.
So what's the best program to do that for you?
Best program to do that for you?
I mean,
An experienced person who does data management.
no, but you've got your mags coming off into the red mag reader. So what are you going to use to do that checksum for?
I mean, I coded my own, so I'm a little bit weird, but like Silver Stack.
Yeah, there's numerous
Yeah.
options out there,
Yeah.
but the bottom line is you're going to be looking for MD5 is the government military standard.
Right.
There's a faster XX hash is another that is used sometimes. That's another standard. But there are a couple programs.
Shopper Pro, yeah.
is probably the widest known.
And Silver Stack's pretty common these days.
Silver Stack. There's also Hedge.
Hedge, yeah.
And then if you work in the area world, then the Codex data management or production suite is another one that does some of that.
Yeah.
So that's going to basically verify. You're going to copy it off your mag and then do a verify against.
Yeah, I mean, some of these programs allow you to kind of do it all through the program, and then it'll run the checks and spit it all out. Some people still will use the copy and then run their MD5 or whatever, their checksum, and then see what the report says and then figure out what's going on there. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But the basic thing that you're doing is you're verifying that your data.
This is going to slow down your DIT there, basically. You're not going to, well, because you've got to do an extra checker. You're going to copy it and then check.
Well, the robot's checking it up. It shouldn't slow the DIT down too much,
No.
especially if it's faster drives, which I'm going to touch on right now. So one of the interesting, yeah.
Sorry, one other note on those is one thing to look for in a program you're using is a log file. You always want a log of the copies you're making so that you know that because what these will do is, at least when you enable the option, it'll spit out a file that's usually a text file or PDF that will say, I move this file from this drive to this drive, and it passes MD5 checks and we're passing.
Yeah. And the log file is good for two reasons, and this is actually getting a little bit back into the streaming realm. If something goes wrong somewhere and like a post house doesn't have footage or something, they got a corrupt frame, you can go back to that log file and say, hey, we did our job, somebody else's robot sucked, and that's fine. But the key thing with a lot of these softwares, at the moment, while the footage is still on the mag, you want to see an error if there is something wrong. Like could not verify data, whatever the error is that comes up. Mine's a nice little one that opens up a web page and says like, look here, there's something bad, something weird happened. And this honestly really only pertains to the media I'm writing to. And on my jobs, because we're using new media all the time, I rarely use like a drive I've been working with all year long as an offload drive. That's pretty rare. I usually am just constantly buying media because that's my film stock basically at this point. So I don't get into a lot of the situations where I know some DITs who have been using some old stuff and like they constantly are dealing with errors and like, you ever see this? And I'm like, no, God. Why? And your drive's been written to for 5 years. Like, what are you doing? Like, yeah, you got to cycle some stuff every now and again. Two questions. Yeah, what was that one?
If you're reusing your files, rewriting over them, how do you verify that the file the media is good enough to write on, that there aren't any errors left in it?
So there's other software where you can check disk health and things like that. I mean, this is where the minutia is, and what I was saying is get someone who's experienced with data management because you can start investigating. Even some of the manufacturers make tools to check drive health. Windows and Mac, they have protocols and tools within the OS that lets you check drive health. All of these things you can do. You have to get a nerdy person. I'm nerdy, I don't like talking about it too much, but basically there's ways to do it.
Yeah, because I'd be afraid to record new footage and know it could be damaged.
So interestingly enough, since Red's here, and we do have their mags here, Red does actually verify media health. Area, I think, does it too on 2 types of media. But basically, sometimes you'll see a mag plugin, and it'll go secure format recommended or something like that because of how the data has been written to the disk. It just wants to make things fresh and healthy again. There's a few other messages. They come up sporadically, so I don't know them all by heart, but sometimes it'll be like, oh, firmware update or whatever, but usually it's because something's just been formatted a bunch. Like if you're renting a camera from Panavision with mags that have been used on 50 other jobs, you turn on a camera and you'll go, oh, okay, it's telling me what to do. And it will tell you what to do. That's actually what you get with the bigger boy cameras. They give you a lot of error checks along the way. James.
Oftentimes we'll see that after someone overthinks it and does a formatting outside the camera. You should always
Yes.
put bags in your camera.
Just gonna get to
What
that.
the DIT tells you, don't let him do it. You should do it in your
Yeah,
camera.
I always treat camera media like film. It has one job. It's only doing the job of recording the data here and offloading. Some people write files back to the mags, and then the data's fragmented on these SSDs, and that's bad news. And then again, the camera will warn you, but like I don't see that because it's not part of my workflow. But when you do see it, you're like, did they copy a LUT because they didn't put oh my God. And that's why that happens. There was another question.
I was just gonna say, I haven't gone through sort of like the silver stack thing. That's all for Mac. There's like, I think Magic Bullet is the only company that, or
Shoplet Pro.
that giant Shoplet.
Imagine products to manufacture that.
Hedge is Windows, right?
It might be. I think it is both. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
The one I found was from Red Giant. But
Yeah, Offload does, I believe, in MD5. It's a nice, cheap program too. Needs to be updated with a couple things. So yeah, that's my whole thing on Holy Mag and kind of even into redundancy. There's a lot of things that you're worried about on set, and I'm going to be touching a little bit in the next section because I'm dealing with data management, like the DIT talk, the data management talk, but you're going to be recording a multitude of assets that need to go somewhere. It sounds like most people here are from the camera side, but for the people who are owning production companies or part of something like that, you're dealing with assets like crazy. You got audio, you got graphics sometimes. I deal with crazy amounts of assets on some jobs. Sometimes I'm generating other elements through other software programs or even types of plate photography. These all become things that you have to keep track of and have it working in an organized manner, which I'm going to talk about in the next section. What else can I talk about the general camera side on set? Because we're talking about this a little bit more in the next section. Any questions around this in terms of data security, backing up, that kind of stuff? I was going to kind of save this for later. So what type of drives do you use on set? That's an interesting question from me. Like for me on almost every job. So you saw my Qatar rig where I had nothing but RAID drives, and RAID's kind of risky, right? Well, I have redundancy and I'm doing all the data checks, so no, not really. It's actually all fairly educated guesses, and I have triple redundancy in that case, so if something goes wrong and I decide to slip in the bathtub with one of those RAIDs, I have 2 other copies, not a big deal. But the speed of offloading is something that's really interesting. I mentioned that I solved some of my problems. So I sometimes will build my own computers. And I will sometimes even work with hardware manufacturers to build custom computers for me. And I don't mean like Dell making me a computer. I mean the people who make motherboards to make me a custom motherboard. Because things like USB bus speed, on a lot of motherboards, you're sharing one bus. But you can do things cleverly or find higher end motherboards that have separate bus channels. I think my favorite one was on a shoot where I was shooting about 6 to 8 terabytes a day and was dealing with the data management myself, I came up with a computer that had separate bus channels. So it usually would take me about 27 to 32 minutes to offload 1 terabyte of media. Now, if you were doing that one after another, times 6, that's 3 hours, times 8, 4, okay, that's 4 hours of copying, right? By using a whole bunch of media readers that can do concurrent copies and data checks, and having the media to write to that can tap out at that speed, I'm able to offload 6 to 8 mags in 27 minutes. So when a DIT comes to me and asks me for a 20% full mag or a 30% full mag, I fire them. Because I'm not from this planet. No, I mean like, this isn't the thing. Like the DIT shouldn't be you want to make everyone's production day easy, but the DIT should not be telling you what to do with your media. I'm going to tell you that straight up. They should have a conversation with you in terms of what you desire and whatnot. But if a guy's trying to leave at 8 o'clock at night and whatever, and he's working on his USB 2 connectors and yeah. Go home. Times have changed, I hate to say it. I do see a lot of people, it's very hard to stay on top of hardware because it changes so rapidly, but you have to have some expectations versus reality. So I actually had to fire a DIT once up in San Fran, and it was a travesty because he came highly recommended, but then we discovered his mobile DIT kit was a rented kit, and he had no idea how it worked. The thing never actually worked. So I'm at the Fremont Hotel on the mezzanine where we were doing our prep for the shoot, and I'm trying to figure out what this workstation is. And meanwhile, I happen to have had my laptop, which is a full setup. I'm just like, I literally told the producer, I'm like, I have this. Like, we can use this. Like, it's literally midnight. We need to shoot tomorrow at like 4 a.m. Like, we gotta cut our losses. Like, bring this back to the rental house. Nice to see you. I'm gonna go work on the data and go to bed. So that's why I do a lot of automation and programming, because I find myself in strange situations like that where suddenly one thing has been a chaotic error and you have to kind of solve that situation. So you kind of get my thing on redundancy, but to highlight more about the drives that we use on set, we're offloading to SSD more nowadays. SSDs are really cool because you can kind of drop them, but don't do that. Like, they're just a little bit more rugged than a spinning disk, because spinning disks are ballerinas that like to get tipped over and then they can't stand back up. But they're pretty rugged. There's a time and place for all things, like I was saying, and we ship these rugged drives that have, full enclosed case. There's all sorts of actual tests that these companies do in terms of shock tests to let you know if the drive's going to be okay. If you're expecting the cheapest hard drives out there to be capable of a shock test, no, that's not going to be the thing. But there's just a variety of types of drives, and really what comes to be, oh, you want me? This light is so bright. That was so crazy. Yeah, so LaCie's newest little banger. These aren't even out yet?
No, that one is
they ship middle of October.
No. So this is, do you have one of the regular, like 4 terabyte, like the bigger one?
Oh, yeah.
The bigger SSD?
Yeah.
They're all the same size.
No. Oh, sorry, not the regular 2.5s. Oh, this one's
This is the
orange,
other one.
and people can see it. I want to show them the size difference. And actually, it kind of highlights what I even came in my bag with. Don't throw that one. Well, it's like this light I can't see in this direction. That was like literally using the force. I have no idea how I caught that. Okay, so I'm gonna use the orange ones for this example here. So the max write speed is
That one is 250 or 240.
240 on a good day. Oh, this is a RAID. Okay, yeah, no, okay, it is a good day. Okay, so this is a rugged RAID. You can see the thickness and the size. So 240 here. What's the max on this one?
1,000.
1,000. And if you get the 2 terabyte, is it also 1,000?
It's also 1,000, but the black one is
The higher speed.
the Thunderbolt 3. Yeah.
Okay.
It's 2,800.
So with these newer, faster connections, you can see what's going on here. And we're now using media in cameras that can be offloaded somewhere in the range of 400 megabytes per second or faster. So if you have a bottleneck with what you're writing to, I'll even say this is, but I don't mind this being a little bit bad slow. If this is like 80 megabytes per second, no, that's getting rough because now you're waiting for a very long time to copy stuff. And I sometimes do that when I'm out in the field because sometimes the smaller drives are the solution. But now we're getting into drives of this size. So I can put this many candy bars in my pants and this many, so now I can have like 1, 2, objectively 4 if you start looking at the volumes. I mean, a little bit bigger, but now this is going to be more expensive because it's faster media, it's solid state. This one's going to be probably more expensive because it's Thunderbolt 2 and USB 3.1 backward. Sorry, yeah, 3.
And USB-C.
And USB 3, C.
Only. You need the C for the power, but it can work on both C and.
So, but it works on both protocols, so.
So yeah, it's actually the first hi, I'm Christy from LaCie.
Yeah.
This is our product manager. Our product
So the black one right there, it's the first of its kind. So typically most Thunderbolt 3 SSDs today will only light up if it is a Thunderbolt 3 connection.
Right.
This is a new Intel chip that we worked with Intel on. This one is backward compatible with USB-C, only not USB 3.
Okay.
But it comes with a Thunderbolt 3 cable.
This is so huge. This is so huge, and I need to.
Is the SSD also a RAID?
No.
And
this
does
is
it-
one SSD inside. One
Is it backwards compatible to 3 through a C adapter?
No.
Oh, okay, spicy meatball.
Yeah, it's a power issue.
Okay, so still good.
NVMe SSD in there for 2,800 megabytes per second that requires a certain amount of power.
How many people here are working with Macs? Okay, I can discern that the other ones are probably working with Windows or don't have computers and live in a cave. No, I'm using Windows, so I'm not making any sort of insult. So what's really powerful about this is I'm exploring all these new connectors, but my clients and post houses often don't have Thunderbolt 3. I was one of the insane people in the world to be an early adopter to Thunderbolt 3 on the Windows side of things. Drivers, chaos, not good at all. The controllers were also bunk, just bad things. But I find that there's a lot for me to learn in those situations. So what's really powerful about this is you can get the speed benefits of a Thunderbolt 3 connection with the, can I say NVMe?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the NVMe media in here. It's a fast, very fast 4X or
The media on it, it's a PCI 3.
PCI 3. So
Yeah, it's the media inside of there is actually our FireCUDA NVMe that people also buy to upgrade their rigs. It's capable of 3,450 megabytes per second on its own.
Yeah,
So it's actually, the bottleneck is the connector even with Thunderbolt 3.
that's the point I'm making. So on set, you could actually write to this thing wicked fast and dish off a client drive real quick. And then for compatibility, most newer laptops have at least one USB 3.1 port, most. Now that the USB 4 standard is basically Thunderbolt 3, a couple new protocols and backwards compatibility, you're going to see pretty much the future of all computers go that route. So, and that's actually really sensible because it's been absolute hell dealing with all these different connectors and cables. USB-C is kind of nice because you can plug it in both ways. Kind of wish it was a little bit wider, my personal taste, but because it'll fall out. And when I see like these cameras that are plugged into USB-C drives without securing the cable, I'm like, what are you doing? Like that thing can get unplugged. So always secure your cable if you're doing it that way. What's the question back there?
The C question, what version of USB is in the USB-C?
It's 3.1 Gen. Sorry, well, on the Rugged Raid Pro, the one he had, the bigger one he had in his hand, it's 3. It doesn't matter because you're limited by the drives.
That's Gen 1.
It's Gen 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, the orange one is Gen 2. So
Orange
you
and black both.
yeah, exactly. So that's how you.
The orange one and the black one up there are both
Yeah.
USB-C Gen 2.
Where does Neil live?
France.
2 terabytes.
I've always wanted to meet that guy.
And 4 terabytes.
You might be at CES, so you might have.
Oh wow, that's kind of wild.
And just a couple of other really cool things about these. Not that you want to drop them, but you can at the 3 meters. They also go in water. Not that you want to, but if it did. It's a new IP67 rating, so that means up to a meter of water for 30 minutes is what it states. And how we actually test it is we power pressure water straight into the connector to make sure it passes at a certain rating, and then literally, not that you want to put water with a cable, but if you do, kind of shake it off first, put it in, it will still light up. So both of those things are unique to this new connector that we're using on the black one, which is Rugged SSD Pro. The orange one, you were talking earlier about data security and all that. It's also IP67 rated, but the best thing about that is it does have encryption on it.
I'm talking about it. Yeah.
Did you talk about it?
No, it's the next section. It's okay.
Oh, okay, then I won't talk about
No,
it.
do it. This is open ended. It's fine. We can do a little bit of dashing around. Well, no, I mean the key thing you're making a really good point about is things that happen on set. Like why I like SSDs in general. I'm not sure if LaCie was the first company to do the sort of ruggedized thing, but this has become pretty common on set these days.
15 years in January.
Wow, you are very excited about your products. Happy anniversary. So the crazy thing is because this has become sort of ubiquitous and like pretty common these days, now we're having something that's an even more rugged solution that, I mean, I can honestly fit that in a smaller envelope to ship across the world, which is good and bad at the same time. But, you know, this is going to become more powerful because I'm now doing light data management work on laptops of this size, and now my bags are smaller, and I can do stuff remotely. You know, I can't do the big boy stuff on the big drives. You know, this you can get the. What's the largest capacity on a 12 big, Mark? 96 terabytes or bigger now, right?
On the 12 big,
Yeah.
we went to 168.
Yeah. So this is 168 terabytes of this media, and effectively actually having access.
Yeah.
That's crazy pants.
That's
Don't.
140 terabytes in RAID 6.
Yeah.
And still operating at 2,000 megabytes a second.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so the different media for different use cases. This tends to be something that you'll see in studios, though. And actually, what's really nice about stuff like this, because the core 3.5 drives got so big in capacity, you can have something that looks like that instead of an entire rack of drives. That's been huge for me. I mean, good Lord, it saves a lot of space. I'm a big advocate of using spinning drives externally now as external storage, and everything inside my workstations and laptops are all solid state. Because of reliability mainly and speed. So
can I?
yeah,
Just to touch on, because you kind of mentioned it, or touched on it for a second, but there is one thing to think about, because people do say, well, but those SSDs are awfully expensive, or this drive is awfully expensive. Speed on set makes a big difference when it comes to budget also.
yes, yeah, that's
Because
big time.
The big thing to think about is, if it's going to take you 4 times as long to offload your cards, potentially your DIT is going to be there late. If your DIT is there late, let's say you go 2 hours overtime. You're not just paying the DIT for those 2 hours, you're paying for security, you're paying the location, you're paying,
Yeah.
your budget starts exploding if you're spending more time on set.
Yeah. This has been, over the last few years, adopting NVMe and SSD RAIDs and things like that for on-set production workflows has been one of the bigger boons to saving time on set. And combined with more reliability, meaning I can drop this or apparently get it wet, which I will not be doing. This is very powerful and it's something you can rely on. That's really all you're hoping for until you actually get down and dirty with actually properly archiving your footage. Because you're not fitting a whole project on this of any size. Like, you might have a thing that's 2 terabytes of data, but this is something that you would use as a transport drive or an offload drive, or dish from this to go to a studio, boom, 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 have a couple copies. Very fast to make that happen. And as Mark's saying, it saves you time, which actually equates to money. And usually I find the cost benefits of the media helps more than paying a DIT who doesn't want to be there. So, yeah. And my whole solution is wacky different because I'm offloading after the fact usually anyways, to fast media and not work because we're doing it so fast now. So in the sense of the world that I live in, where it's all happening fast and not necessarily on set even, versus some of the world that has yet to adapt to the newer SSD stuff, it's such a dynamic because I talk to people on productions where it's like, oh yeah, we got so much data to move, and I'm like, no homie. Like we can do this a little bit quicker if we kind of open up and we have the budget for the drives. Let's come up with a solution that isn't the 24-hour DIT situation. Like, let's figure that out. Yeah.
In my workflow, the red mag and the red mag reader is the bottleneck, and it's so slow compared to those SSDs.
The USB 3 one?
Yeah.
You can get about 450, 475 off it.
Driving even like SSD, so we haven't. I think they're gonna.
Well, so with the Red Mags, all of that is like SATA based. So the newest connector is a 3.1 Gen 2. So you're going to be limited to the max read speed from the drive itself, as well as whatever bus and stuff that you have plugged in and what you can do. So no, and the fastest reader that I know, you can get up to past 500 megabytes per second, but that's pretty fast. I mean, that's 21 minutes per, I mean, I do this every day, so like it's 21 minutes per mag. It's not bad.
Yeah, I mean the codex reader and the codex mags are like double or triple faster than that.
Well, it's NVMe. It's different media. They're also, yeah, a lot of differences there.
They're also a lot more expensive.
Yeah. Well, you'll see a time when Red taps into some new media for sure.
We're gonna see a new media by Red side next year. Are they gonna come up with something faster?
I mean, I've told them to. But at the moment, with the camera ecosystem, it isn't, it didn't, you got to keep in mind when DSMC2 was created and things like that. Like, there's all these things. The only reason what you're experiencing on the codec side happens is that's not even an Array product, that's a codex product. And what they're doing is they're just putting new housings on NVMe and then running with it. So they just adapt to it differently and they don't care. That's fine. I think moving forward, it'll be an interesting balancing act between faster and, I think the future is going to be media that's 500 megabytes per second and up, meaning like from all cameras. So like right now, there's a new standard called CF Express, with smaller little cards, and they're touting like their fast read speeds and write speeds, but those are always the burst speeds and not the sustain, so we don't really know what those numbers are until we test the cards. But the thing is from our side, yes, faster media, absolutely a benefit to download quicker. But the camera side, the Array cameras aren't writing to those things at all close to the writing speed. So it's one of those weird ones. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I want faster media. I don't want to spend $10,000 more on new media though. So it's like one of those, please, but also please. But yeah, I mean, the future is new media, the new standards, because it's becoming more popular. USB 3.1, I mean, the NVMe stuff through Thunderbolt 3 happened this year, really, in terms of anything close to mass adoption. Like I was saying earlier, the early Windows implementation and even some of the Mac stuff, the drivers, the controllers, like nightmare. So if you did that 3 years ago, kind of rough days. But now, better. It's all about deploying stuff that's reliable at a certain time. If you said on a production, we're going to work with a Thunderbolt 3 ecosystem 3 years ago, I would have said, get your inner tube out because it's going to be rocky waters. Like it's going to be crazy. Inner tube? Is that what people call tubes? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. But yeah, now it's becoming standardized, and especially now with Thunderbolt 3, USB 3.1, and USB 4, you're going to see a lot of people going, oh, yes, this makes more sense.